At 9:07 p.m., the telephone rang. Not your telephone, the telephone. The one in the hallway or the kitchen or on a small table beside the sofa. The one everybody in the house could hear. And before anyone picked it up, the room changed. Someone looked at the clock. Someone else said, "Who would be calling now?" Because after 9, a phone call was no longer just a phone call. It was information. For people who grew up in the years between the analog world and the online world, calling after 9 was a small social rule with a surprisingly large job. It told you when the day was supposed to be winding down. It protected dinner, homework, television, and the first quiet stretch of the evening. It also carried a little fear. Late calls might mean bad news, a family emergency, or a relative who had forgotten the time. The number itself was never sacred. In some homes it was 9, in others 10. The point was that everyone understood the boundary. This is the story of what that boundary made possible, and what disappeared when the telephone stopped belonging to the whole household. Before a call could find you, it had to find your house. You dialed a number from memory, from a school notebook, or from the little address book that lived near the phone. Then you waded through the rings, knowing that the person you wanted might not be the first person to answer. You might get a parent, a sibling, a roommate, a grandparent who had just sat down. Sometimes you got a stranger who had the same last name because a number had been written down wrong. And then came the small performance. "Hello, may I speak to?" If you were 12, this was the part that made your stomach tighten. You were not simply contacting a friend. You were entering the social space of their family. The phone had a cord. The cord had a length. The length determined where a conversation could happen and how private it could be. A long cord might reach the stairs. A shorter one left you standing in the kitchen, trying to sound casual while everyone walked past. A call was also a negotiation about time. You did not call during dinner unless you knew the household. You did not call too early in the morning. And after a certain hour, you had to have a good reason. The answering machine changed the experience, but not all at once. It meant a call could leave a message instead of vanishing into the night. It also created a new little ritual, waiting for the beep, trying to sound like yourself, then deciding whether the message was too long, too awkward, or too obviously about a crush. By the 1990s, the answering machine was becoming ordinary in many households, but it still did not feel like a private inbox. It sat in the shared room, blinking at everyone. The late call rule worked because the phone was public, even when the conversation was private. One ringing sound could wake a house. One long-distance call could become a question about the bill. One awkward pause could be overheard from the hallway. That sounds inconvenient now, and it was. But inconvenience created information. You learned who was home. You learned whether a friend's parents were strict. You learned that a person who said, "They're not here," might mean they are here, but they cannot come to the phone. You learned to identify voices before they said their names. The rule also gave people an exit. If the evening had ended, the call could end with it. There was no expectation that you should remain reachable because your status light was green or your location was visible. To call after 9 was to ask for an exception. That made the call feel important before anyone had said a word. And there was a special kind of suspense in not knowing. You could not see the caller's name. You could not preview the message. You could not tell whether the person was calling because they missed you, needed something, or had simply found a quiet minute. The ring arrived without context, and the household supplied the first interpretation. Is everything okay? That question was not melodrama. It was a reasonable response to a system with very little information. The same system made ordinary plans feel more deliberate. If you wanted to meet someone at the mall on Saturday, you agreed on a time and a place. If you were late, you had a problem, not a continuous thread of updates. A plan was a promise made in advance because the network would not keep adjusting itself around you. Of course, the rule excluded people too. A shared phone was difficult for anyone who needed privacy, and a household could be controlling, noisy, or simply impossible to reach. The old system was not morally better. It was just more visible. The boundary after 9 did not create perfect manners. It created a common expectation that other people's quiet had value. Then, the phone became personal. First came cordless phones, which loosened the cord's geography. Then pagers, which offered a signal without a conversation. Then mobile phones, text messages, email, and eventually the small rectangle that could carry every person, every room, and every hour in your pocket. The social rule did not disappear in one dramatic moment. It dissolved into options. You could call without waking the house. You could send a message that waited. You could see a name before answering. You could ask, "Are you free?" without interrupting anything more than a notification. That was a real improvement. It made coordination easier. It gave people more privacy. It helped families stay connected across distance. It made it possible to reach someone who was not at home, and in an emergency, to reach out quickly.
But the old uncertainty was replaced by a new kind of pressure. A message could wait, but it could also be seen. A person could be unavailable, but the little status indicator might suggest otherwise. The phone stopped announcing itself to the whole room and started whispering directly to one person. That sounds gentler. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it means the boundary has moved inside your head. The old question was, is it too late to call? The new question is, why have they not answered? It would be easy to turn this into a story about the past being better. It was not. The past had missed calls that could not be returned until morning. It had children rehearsing what to say to an adult. It had people waiting beside a phone, and households where one person's need for quiet controlled everyone else. Modern communication solved real problems. It gave us access, speed, flexibility, and a way to maintain relationships that geography once made fragile. What it did not preserve was the shared stopping point. Before the feed, the end of the evening was often visible. The television went off. The answering machine clicked. The phone stayed quiet because everyone knew the day had entered a different phase. Now, contact can arrive at any time, in any room, through any device. That freedom is useful. It is also why silence can feel like a decision instead of a default. The late call rule created a tiny zone of protected unavailability. Not complete privacy, not perfect rest, just an ordinary understanding that people were allowed to disappear for the night without explaining themselves. We gained immediacy. We lost some of the innocence of not knowing. We gained convenience. We lost the small drama of a plan that had to survive on its own. And we gained the ability to contact one person directly while losing the strange accidental community of the household phone. This is why the memory belongs especially to Xennials, the people who remember childhood before the feed, but entered adulthood as the feed was being built. They remember asking a friend's parents for permission to talk. They remember writing directions on paper. They remember the sound of a modem, the first email address, the first mobile phone that felt impossibly advanced. They are old enough to remember when communication required preparation, and young enough to have watched preparation disappear. That in-between position is nostalgia, but is also a kind of literacy. Xennials remember that technology doesn't simply make communication faster. It changes what counts as considerate, private, urgent, or normal. The After 9 rule was never really about love. It was about recognizing that another person had a right outside your request for access. Maybe the useful question is not whether we should finally go back. Maybe it is whether we can choose a version of it now. A time when the phone is not an alarm, an audience, or an obligation. A time when silence means nothing is wrong. Because before the feed, nobody had to explain why they were offline. And sometimes that was the most human rule of all. If you remember another small rule that shaped everyday life before the feed,